Welcome to the Phoenix Spotlight, the place where we explore and share discussions on issues that are close to our hearts. The place where we share stories and experiences of people, feature places, and explore all things New Mexico. Hello to the land of enchantment. I am Samalilo. Journalism is a distinct passion that not everyone shares, yet journalism plays an important part in shaping a society, developing a community, and weaving our history. In the most recent field trip of the Phoenix Times to the New Mexico PBS KNME television station, I was privileged to have a sit-down interview with two of New Mexico PBS KNME journalists, Paskus and Jeff Proctor, an interview which aims to inspire young journalists to make a difference in the community. Hello, will you please introduce yourself to us?
Sure, my name is Laura Paskus and I'm a senior producer at New Mexico PBS and I produce the program Our Land.
Right. What field of journalism were you a part of before your present position?
So I'm an environmental journalist and I've worked in print, online, public radio, and now public television.
Fascinating. When you were younger, did you ever imagine yourself becoming a journalist, or is that something that happened later?
So I wanted to be a writer when I was younger, but I never imagined that I would be a journalist until I decided to become one about 20 years ago.
And was there a specific person or event that inspired you to become a journalist?
Yeah, so during the administration of George W. Bush, I was pretty appalled at his environmental record and actions and his administration's actions. And then after 9/11, the U.S. military acted in ways that I thought were really immoral, and the United States press just totally went along with bombing Afghanistan and bombing Iraq. And there was such excitement in the United States for militarism and pro-Bush propaganda that I thought that there needed to be better journalists.
So was that event that sparked your interest, the need to become an advocate for something like that?
I think that it was really, for me, it was a catalyst to report the news in ways that weren't really patriotic, which is what I saw the national press doing, and to be telling the stories about, in particular, the Bush administration's environmental record. At the time, they were also using national security as a way to try to overturn environmental laws as well.
Can you describe the article that you believe was a turning point in your career?
I think it was just like the steady drumbeat of extreme U.S. patriotism without allowing for critical voices or alternative perspectives that really kind of cumulatively kind of made me want to do something different.
What challenges did you encounter as an environmental journalist, and how did you overcome these challenges throughout your career?
So I think one of the biggest challenges is holding people in power accountable for environmental enforcement or lack thereof. And what I've seen happen in my career is early on, Republican administrations were very they lacked transparency with the press, and now what I've seen over the course of decades is now Democratic administrations have adopted many of those same strategies of not being transparent with the public and the press.
As a journalist, we know that you can't please everyone. How do you handle negative feedback and criticism?
That's a great question. I think it depends. Early on in my career, when I worked in print, people would call you on the phone or write you handwritten letters if they didn't like your reporting. Now, and it kind of took effort. Like not very many people were going to do that and put that effort forward. But now, in an age of social media and online commenting and sort of the anonymous nature sometimes of the internet is, I think that people can be really hurtful and unkind, and also not honest. And so I do my best to ignore them as much as possible.
Right. So let it pass by.
Yeah, every once in a while something slips through that feels hurtful because it's either personal or it's just not true. It's manipulative or trying to untruthfully challenge a narrative, but for the most part I try to ignore stuff like that.
So there's, like, in your opinion, been an increase in these sort of negative comments and like accusatory tones about things?
Yeah, there's so much. Maybe it's just easier for people to type in negative comments. But I will say that here at New Mexico PBS, we also have a lot of viewers who really love our programming, who will talk to me in person, and that's really, really a wonderful thing.
That's great. What has your experience as an environmental journalist been like overall?
So I think that I'm incredibly lucky to be an environmental journalist, because I really like being outside and I really like learning about ecosystems and habitats and communities and kind of what's happening in the world. And so I get to learn those things and then figure out ways to tell stories to help other people learn those same things. So it's pretty fantastic.
That's great. What is the biggest takeaway from your journalistic career?
I think my biggest takeaway is that, wow, that's a great question. What is my biggest takeaway? My biggest takeaway is that if you have a curiosity about the world and appreciate the tools of storytelling and wanting to share knowledge and experiences with other people, that journalism is a really, really great way to spend part of your life.
Okay. Is there a specific article you believe received the most attention by the media? Or, like, why do you think it did, if there was?
That's another really good question. I think during the administration of Governor Susana Martinez, she was a Republican who very much filled her cabinet with anti-environmental decision makers and policy makers, and I think that some of my reporting during that time, shining a light on what was happening with respect to things like copper mining and climate change and climate education and some water projects. I think I feel proud of that work, because I feel like if I hadn't have spent the time uncovering that, other reporters wouldn't have picked up on it, and the public wouldn't have known, and lawmakers wouldn't have known. So I feel proud for having been a watchdog during 8 years of her administration.
That's good. So my final question is, what advice can you give me and other aspiring journalists to succeed in the field of journalism?
So I think that the skills that you need as a journalist, I think any journalist will tell you that you need to be curious and hardworking and have a thick skin. I would add that I hope that journalists are also compassionate and loving, and that they care deeply about the communities that they're a part of and that they're covering. And I also think that something that I've seen as I've gotten older is I'm proud of younger journalists for trying to have better boundaries and better balance in their lives. I think my generation and older, we allowed ourselves to be taken advantage of by employers. And I'm proud when I see younger journalists who stand up for themselves in the workplace.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, can you please introduce yourself for us?
My name is Jeff Proctor. I am the executive producer for news and public affairs here at New Mexico PBS.
What field of journalism were you a part of before your present position right now?
So I have worked in newspapers, daily newspapers and weekly newspapers, digital media organizations, commercial television as a freelancer, and now in public television.
Okay. When you were younger, did you ever imagine yourself becoming a journalist?
I don't think I did, and again, this will be similar to Laura's answer, but I grew up as a writer. I was a writer basically from the time that I could form thoughts and words. Second or third grade is when I started kind of doing that. Writing was the way that I entered the world, and then later on I sort of became interested in world events and the things that I was seeing around me, and got really lucky that I could sort of combine my interest in the world with the thing that I was naturally good at as a kid.
That's wonderful. Was there a specific person or event that inspired you to become a journalist?
Yes and yes. Person-wise, I moved to New Mexico in August of 2002 and started my career at the student newspaper here at UNM, the Daily Lobo. And there was a guy who was the writing coach there at the time. I thought at first that I might want to be a sports writer, and he had had a really big career as a journalist, moderated presidential debates, worked at the Baltimore Sun, interviewed all sorts of world leaders, and he convinced me and sort of identified in me that hard news and investigative reporting would actually kind of match my interests. He's really the person who personally inspired me, and then there were a number of journalists, including people like Hunter Thompson and Seymour Hersh, who I had read for my whole life, who inspired me from afar. And then in terms of events, I think the Iraq War was very much something that made me incredibly interested in telling stories, not from the perspective of power, but from the perspective of people who power was used against.
That is very interesting. That it's such a long journey, and that so many different things inspired you at once.
It's true.
Can you describe the article you believe was a turning point in your career?
Something that I wrote or something that I read?
Either.
Yes. So the first story that I wrote at the student newspaper that really made a difference and upset people was a story about Medicaid fraud in the pain clinic at the University of New Mexico Hospital. Basically, there was a doctor who was scheduling visits with patients who had chronic pain, and then canceling those visits and not rendering services to those people, and still billing the government for that money so that he could get rich. So that was a story that really sort of opened the world of what I call accountability journalism for me, and again really sort of solidified the idea that what I wanted to do was to tell stories of people who had been harmed by power.
That's very cool. What challenges did you encounter as an investigative journalist, and how did you overcome these challenges throughout your career?
Investigative reporting in particular is the kind of job where the only way that you really know you're doing it well is if everyone is mad at you. So that's been a personal challenge over time, and sort of caused me to learn different practices for being introspective and finding ways to make my life less attached to my job. So that's one challenge. Another challenge that I've always had has been sort of access to information and access to public records, and access to the harms that I mentioned before that have been visited on people by power. So to tell those stories you have to be able to get at the records and the documents and the official sources, the people who actually did the harm. And that's been incredibly challenging throughout the course of my career. So one of the things that I've had to do over time to overcome those challenges is file lawsuits against the government under our transparency laws. I've done that a whole bunch of times, way more times than I ever really wanted to. I just want the records. I don't want to sue anybody. I'm not a lawyer. But that's one tool that I have had to use continuously is litigation. And the other way that I have managed to overcome some of those access problems would be to make sure that people who do the jobs that I'm reporting on in the right way and for the right reasons know that they can trust me to tell stories about the folks who are doing things the wrong way and harming people. So having a really robust and wide and diverse group of sources has helped me overcome those challenges too.
So it's really important to come at it from different ways depending on the situation?
Yes, because I'm just one person and I have my perspective and the way I believe about the world. And, you know, humans are designed anatomically with just two eyes that look out, right? So it's hard for me to have a 360-degree perspective on the world without a good set of ears.
As journalists, we know that you can't please everyone. How do you handle negative feedback and criticism?
Yeah, no, we can't please everyone, that's true. One thing that I think has been important for me over time, and there was an evolution in this certainly, when I first started and had like initial brushes with negative feedback, I took it incredibly personally, and it was hurtful, kind of emotionally hurtful. And then I think I developed sort of a mechanism over time of, I don't care what you say about me or about my work. I'm just going to keep doing my thing. And I think that as I've gotten older, I have balanced those two positions. I do think it's important for journalists to be open to criticism. I don't get it right every single time. I need to be open to people giving me suggestions for how I can do my job better. And also, there's nothing more important in journalism than accuracy. It doesn't matter how well I've told the story or how pretty the pictures are that went with the story. If it's wrong, it's useless. And if I've made a mistake, I need to be accountable for that to the people who live here and the people who read my stories. So being open to criticism is important. I also think that the flavor and style of criticism and attacks on journalists have changed. It's angrier, it's meaner. It comes from a lot of different directions. You don't know where it's coming from often. As Laura had mentioned, the internet has certainly changed that in a lot of ways. And the last thing I'll say is I don't think that journalism and journalists have done a good job historically of telling our own story. So when you hear phrases like fake news and people have this perception that we just sit in the basement somewhere and make it up, part of the reason for that is that we were taught, especially when I was growing up in journalism, that we shouldn't be the story, that we shouldn't describe the way we do our jobs, that we should be off somewhere else doing that, and not telling people, this is how I did this is how I know this, and being transparent about the way we tell our stories. So I think that's an important thing going forward that I hope at least will change some of the misperceptions about the way I do my job.
That's very interesting to think about it like that. And so the why of why you're getting criticized is what's important?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's one thing to engage intellectually honestly with something that I've written or a piece of television that I've made and say, I had a problem with what you did and here's why. Or you got that wrong and I can show you how you got that wrong. But to call me names or to tell me that I'm in the tank for one politician or one sort of interest group or another, just sort of unfactually, that's a different thing, right? So there are a lot of different kinds of criticism, and the stuff that's in good faith, I need to be able to engage with. The stuff that's not in good faith, I don't know that I have a good answer for you in terms of how I deal with that. I did hear Laura say that she ignores a lot of it. She's better at that than I am.
So it's distinguishing what kind of criticism you're getting.
That's right. Yeah.
What has your experience in investigative journalism been like?
A roller coaster, I guess. That's a cliche, and I abhor the cliche, but that's what it's been like. It's that kind of journalism, and that's not all I've done in my life. I've also worked as an editor and as a producer, and written some feature stories and stuff that didn't make people angry. I do like once in a while to write things that make people smile and happy. But as an investigative reporter, an awful lot of what I've done in the course of my career is spent a lot of time on a story and a lot of research and published it and been certain that there would be some impact, that something would happen as a result of the story that I told. And more often than not, that's not the way it goes. So I have spent a lot of my career shouting at the rain. And one thing about the rain is it doesn't shout back, it just keeps pouring. Once in a while, though, there have been instances where I pushed at something and there was a positive result that came as after a story that I told. So that's been gratifying and really great. Investigative reporting can also tend to be really lonely. Often you're sort of in it with like 2 or 3 other people, and you're in a dark room somewhere that's poorly lit and really grinding to think about the way a story works. So there have been times like that. And also the nature of my work and having done this work in the same place for such a long time, one thing that I have is a group of other journalists who are my people, right? So it's one of the ways that I have found community. So that's been part of the experience of doing this job for a really long time as well. There aren't very many of us, but those of us who have done this for a really long time in this place and care about this place, we care about each other in a way that I don't have community otherwise.
That's very cool that you found it here. What is the biggest takeaway from your journalistic career?
Oh, I don't know. This is a weird time to be asking me that question, because I think having done this for a really long time and having found my way, I've only had this job for 7.5 months. So I think part of what is happening for me now is I'm reevaluating that question. I'm reevaluating the question of why I'm doing this, who it's for, what difference it makes, some of the ways that I think that I haven't done it the way that I would like in the past. So I don't know that I have one like perfect takeaway, but I maybe have some smaller takeaways that I do still have to believe that an informed electorate makes better decisions at the ballot box, because the moment that I stop believing that even a little bit, then I have to stop doing this job. So I do still think that's true. Our job is to shed light, not to master, right? So I do think that journalism still functions in that way, and I have gotten to play a very, very small part in that for the place where I live, and pay taxes and love people and stuff like that. So I think my biggest takeaway is that it does still matter. I'm just not exactly sure in what way I want it to matter going forward or how to make it do that.
So it's changed. That's very interesting.
It has.
What article have you written that has received the most attention by the media, and why do you think that it did?
I don't know that there is one individual thing that I've written or piece of television that I've made. I guess I could think about one sort of ongoing story that maybe got the most attention or had the most impact. I wrote for a very long time and have since made a lot of radio and television and otherwise stories about police violence in New Mexico, and in particular in the city of Albuquerque. I started doing that work when I was at the daily newspaper here, the Albuquerque Journal, and that work there and then at other places later led to a big federal investigation of the police department here for unconstitutional use of excessive force and a whole bunch of other flavors of police misconduct. So that's probably the ongoing story that people know me best for. And I am gratified, I guess, in some ways for the work that I did on that, but it resulted in the big federal investigation. I'm not sure how I feel about that, or whether it really made the kind of difference in policing in Albuquerque that I maybe wish it had. And then, I guess I could list a million other stories that I am most proud of, but that's probably the one I'm known best for.
Last but not least, what advice can you give me and other aspiring young journalists to succeed in the field of journalism?
I would say lean into your empathy first. That's a two-edged sword in journalism. It makes you vulnerable, and sometimes it's difficult to do this work. If you're vulnerable, but your readers, your viewers, your listeners will know the difference. If you're just doing it from a hardened place and with no heart, people can tell. So lean into that is one thing that I would say. The other thing I would say is we grew up, a lot of us who are my age grew up in journalism learning that we needed to be generalists, that we needed to be able to kind of tell stories about everything. I don't think that's true. I've spent most of my career focused on the criminal legal system, and I think specializing is what I would encourage young journalists to do. And the way that I think you should specialize is to report on and make stories about the things that move you and the things that you think are going to move other people. So write or make television about or make radio about what you see and what you care about, because again, if you don't, viewers and readers and listeners are going to know. And the other thing I will say is that I think journalism as a career should be part of an integrated life. It is really easy to be swallowed by this career. It can tend to be really all-consuming work. I have done most of my best work when I had a more complete and integrated life, and this was part of it. So I think that's a really important thing to do as well, is to find balance as you go. And I heard Laura say this too, but I want to double down on that and say that you should not allow yourself to be taken advantage of if you're one of the people making the journalism by the people who own the means of production. I understand that might sound a little bit communist, but in this particular instance, I think that there is a movement happening in journalism now, in particular with younger journalists, that empowers workers. And I am all for that and wish that had existed when I was younger. It would have saved me a lot of money in therapy bills.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Journalism is a journey of continuous seeking for knowledge and exploration of truth. Help us keep the integrity in the field of journalism by keeping the values and ethics of every journalist. Till then, everyone, see you next time in the Phoenix Spotlight.